Hello, students. I'm going to discuss with you a little bit about the first chapter, which is chapter 1. You've already done a little bit of the background of the history of Frederick Douglass, and now you're going to do a little bit more with reading his story. And again, it's a true story, so it's an autobiography about him. And hopefully from the video you gleaned that he is an excellent author, an excellent orator, one of the best rhetoric writers of all time. He was a slave who escaped and gained his freedom and then became an abolitionist who is a person who fights for the removal of slavery. So he was very strong in two purposes. The first one was that he really wanted people to understand that slavery did exist, because some people didn't understand that slavery existed, and then also that it was as oppressive and evil as it was. And so people would make arguments for slavery. So he was making an argument against slavery. And also, for the second purpose in his writing, was to make an argument to abolish it, to get rid of it, to stop it. So he used a lot of rhetoric and persuasion to try to get people to believe him, to believe he was credible, to create logic as to reasons why it was logically a horrible institution with a lot of facts and statistics and examples. And then he also appealed to their emotion as to how it was heartbreaking and broke people and demeaning and dehumanizing to the human race, and how slavery was truly an evil in our society. So that's kind of a little bit of the background of what who Frederick Douglass was and what his purpose was in writing. So we study rhetoric along with Frederick Douglass because that was a strong, strong element of how he wrote and how he persuaded people. So when we read, we're going to look at two parts. One is, what is he trying to say? And secondly is, how does he say it? What kind of rhetoric does he use to further his argument? So we're going to start by reading chapter 1, and you will read it on your own. There's also an audiobook, and you start at 26 minutes, and I have that listed in the folder. There's a little map of, not map, but like telling you what chapters start where. And so you're going to listen to chapter 1. It's pretty short, and then you're going to read through it. Now, chapter 1 also then has a response document that goes with it that is basically finding evidence from the text, stating what rhetorical device it's used, and then what does it appeal to, and how does this device, this like anaphora, how does it create pathos, and how does it further his argument against slavery and exposing the cruelty of it. So we'll get to that in a minute, but first let's just look at what basically was chapter 1 about. So if we look at chapter 1, let me find it here. Hold on. So this is the document that is on Schoology for this assignment, for this task. And basically, the beginning of chapter 1 talks about where he was born in Maryland, and how he doesn't have an accurate knowledge of his age because part of the concept of slaves was that, first of all, they only counted them as 3/4 of a person in the census, and then also because they didn't consider them to be human or worthwhile, and so they would never tell them their birthdays because they didn't want them to be considered to be like a person. And so that was one more way of devaluing them. White children could tell their ages and had their birthdays, but African American children were not given that privilege. In addition to that, they really didn't know very often who their mothers were. They had a little bit of a time with their mothers, and then they were taken away and raised by either other grandmothers or their own grandmother. And in this case, he did not know his mother very much. He has very little recollection of her because they were separated as an infant. And his father was most likely, it was rumored to be that he was the slave owner and that his mother was raped. And they don't talk about that at all. The separating of the mother from the child is most likely to hinder the development of an affection to the mother, and also to just destroy that concept of belonging and the love that a child should have from his mother. And so it's another way of being cruel and treating them in a dehumanizing fashion. Often his mother at the very beginning would travel 12 miles just to see him at night and to sleep next to him. But that was about all. And then after a while, she couldn't do that anymore, and she would be gone when he woke up. And it's very, very sad how they were treated, and how when she died, he didn't even, it was like the death of a stranger because he didn't know her. And she died when he was 7, so she died very young. Again, there was not a lot of indication, but there's whispering about who his father was, and most likely it was the slave owner. This happened quite a bit, and children who were born mulatto children, so the African American mother, and then the slave owner father, who was white. It was a very difficult situation because the white wife would get angry, and because she knew what had happened, and then also the children, their actual children, would often be part of the slave enforcement, and so they might actually be whipping their own half siblings, and so there was just a very, very difficult time here. In contrast to that, and in addition to that, it also brought up how the slave owners almost were harsher to them because they didn't want to be showing favoritism. Then he talks a little bit about his slave owners and those that were really cruel, the masters that were taking care of them, that were hired by the slave owners, and how cruel and hardened they were. And in particular, this one overseer who overseed the plantation and took care of the slaves and made sure they did what they were supposed to do, were often very, very cruel and harsh. And this one's described as a drunkard, and very inhumane and barbaric. Cruel, barbaric, inhumane were some of the ways that they discussed and talked about how their slave owners were. When Frederick Douglass was young, he was living with an aunt of his, and he watched her get brutally beaten. And this part, I think, is very, very difficult to watch, not to watch, but to read. It really speaks to the atrocities of slavery and how cruel and how evil these men were, and how they just didn't care how they treated them. And his Aunt Hester, he watched this, and he talks about how this was how he gained an entrance to the hell of slavery, and how he could never go back because he didn't really know, but this was the first time he saw how sad and difficult and horrible his life was going to be. And he says, "It was all new to me. I had never seen anything like it before. I had always lived with my grandmother on the outskirts of the plantation where she was put to raise the children of the younger women. I had therefore been until now out of the way of the bloody scenes that often occurred on the plantation." And so this was really just one cruel way that he was really introduced to slavery and the cruelty of it, and saw what was going to happen to him in the future. So once you've read that entire thing, it's a pretty short chapter. You are going to go to the chapter 1 response, which has more boxes on it than here. And here's one example that has been done for you. So initially, you have to find one, and there's a quote at the very top. And so if you look at it, your goal is to look over this quote and find different rhetorical devices. So you can annotate it first, and just you're only doing this one really, really long quote. and you're going to find evidence from there. And the first one is done for you. The example is posted. I can't remember if your document has the example on it. If it doesn't, you can just copy and paste it there. And then you're to do 2 more on your own. And so the one that is posted for you looks like this. What evidence do I have from that one? The one that I chose first was the very first part of the line was anaphora, which is no words, no tears, no prayers. And then anaphora is used, and it appeals to emotion. So again, anaphora is where you have the repetition of the same word at the beginning of the phrase. And then how does this device get supported? And that really, he then talks about how his repeated use of the word no, when he repeats that word, it really emphasizes the hardness and the harshness of the slave owner's heart. The word no has a harsh connotation. So when you hear no words, no tears, no prayers, he wouldn't stop beating her, even though she cried and she screamed and she prayed. So his cruelty was made known as he would not listen to words or tears or prayers. No amount of pleading could penetrate his cruel heart. And this really helps us to understand the argument that slavery was cruel and barbaric, because no tears, no words, no prayers could stop the anger and the abuse that this man gave to this woman for no reason at all. So you are to do 2 more of these. So find 2 more quotes and tell what the rhetorical device is, which it appeals to, and then how this device helps that argument in the appeal. And so this case, repeating the word no creates the harshness of that owner's heart, because he had no mercy given to her at all. All right, good luck. Thanks.